Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We apologize for the interruption there. Seems like we were interrupted with connection. So right now we are going into our panel discussion, and it's about eradicating Western media bias in Africa and telling African story by Africans. So first, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our first panelist, Mata Koroma. She is an educator director of TAPA Project. She is a proud mother of two, an author, and a founder of the African Center Educational Panel 4. So that. And then next, I'm going to introduce Fatima. She is an anti-war activist with deep-root passion for ancient law history, tribes, and democracy in African continent. She's also part of the Fuluni group from the North and Western Africa. And we're excited to have her as well. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and I find it very interesting what you managed to gather in such a few time, and it's wonderful to be here, and I hope the discussion actually helps the people back home. And good afternoon, good morning, and good night to everyone.
Awesome. All right, our next speaker is Nabiyu Asfa. He is a social justice advocate based in Colorado. He's a co-founder of Ethiopian American Development Counselor and a Viral No More Movement global organizer. Native to Ethiopia, he's passionate for all things Ethiopia and has served as an African diaspora locally and globally for the past 15 years. So we're excited to have Neb join us as well. Welcome, Nabiyu.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you, Jerusalem.
Awesome. All right. And then next we have Kanji Chang. He is considered to be one of the effective organizers in the U.S., an active people's advocate. He's a founder of important tackling issues, such as local and national police brutality cases. He's been featured in CNN, Fox, and BBC networks. He's also an author. We're excited to have him. He also has his own media. He works with the community as well. We're excited to have him. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, definitely honored to be here with you, good people. It's always an honor to roll with fellow Africans home and abroad.
Awesome. Thank you. A pleasure to have you. I'm excited for our conversation. I think we all are here from different background, different perspective. So I think we'll have a great discussion. So I'm excited. So eradicating Western media bias on Africa, and how do we tell African story by Africans? So my first question for the panelists, and maybe we'll start with Nabiyu, is the Western media bias against Africa? I think there is a lot of different debate about is it not? So I would like to kind of tackle that and see, okay, is it biased, and why do you think? So let's start with Nabiyu, and then maybe we can go to Fatima after that.
Yeah, I absolutely, yes, there is bias in Western media. Those of us who immigrated here and were born in Africa, I think you can relate. I've certainly experienced this. When you tell someone you're from Africa, the questions you get just really shows you the ignorance. And that is directly linked to how people see Africa through the media, the mainstream media. Most Westerners have never visited Africa and may never visit the continent. Yet there is a particular image of Africa in Western minds, and arguably it's negative and it's dark. And this mental image of Africa has its deep roots in the historical relationship of slavery and colonialism, which was really imposed on the continent and its people. It's basically a relationship which defines Africa and Africans as culturally, intellectually, politically, technically backward and inferior. And this idea continues today. And Western media journalists, editors, and even academics adapt this notion about Africa. And it's very clear. I mean, you can go out and see media, photography. It can act as it's a near constant stream of this visual propaganda, as it just predominantly showcases scenes of violence, devastation, and starvation in Africa, and not just Africa and Africans, but all people of African descent in the United States and the Caribbeans. It is very rare that you see people of African descent being shown in a positive light. First, there is a deficiency in coverage. If you look at international media, only about 6%, 6 to 9% ever mentions Africa. All right. And off that, there's been studies done on this. 60% of that primarily focuses on terrorism, famine, disease, political conflict, disaster, and other calamities, right? So this is what the reality is out there and the current state of Western media.
Awesome.
Mhm.
All right, Fatima.
Yes, I would add to it. The issue is it's much bigger than just the fact that you are portrayed in a negative light often. It's the fact that most societies and most citizens in those societies are not educated to deconstruct the ideas or the fallacies that come from this news, because you are created in a reality. For example, I was born in Europe, and I know what I was taught in school, and often goes to, it's the root of this of all of the propaganda and this ideology or idea that was created around the African, that is not taught properly. So children, since a very young age, are taught to think negatively about Africans, which makes adults that watch the news today and are supposed to make decisions from what they hear, from what they watch, from the way that you are supposed to think, it's constructed since a very young age. So our fight today is not just what is said by adults, by most adults that make the news, journalists, academics. It's rooted in, we have to fight for a decolonization that starts from primary school to universities, to academia, to everyone, but it has to start from the root, because there's no way you can change mentalities at the age of 40, at the age of 50, at the age of 60. You can probably change someone from saying something that is derogatory, but you are not going to change the image that's been created since a very young age of what it is. And we have an issue, which is coloniality, that is asked from us. And this is us. We are supposed to want good things for ourselves, but we also think negatively of ourselves. So imagine someone that is not us, that does not look like us, that has been taught the same things that we were taught, to now do the work, make the work to change differently. So that's what we have to think. Sometimes we need to pick up our battles. And today our battle is, in my understanding, is for Africans to know themselves and to work on themselves and know their history and know that there is bias, and ask the right questions. When you watch the news, for example, often conflict, you only hear that there are jihadists, there are terrorists, and they say, oh, they killed 500 people. Are we asking the right questions? No, we never asked who were these people. First of all, they had mothers, they had fathers, they came from somewhere. But often you hear this and they use the number 500, 20, 10 were murdered, but no one ever asks What are the root causes of these issues? And it's us two Africans that we do not do this. But if something is happening elsewhere, for example, the case of Ukraine today, everyone is concerned, even Africans, mostly Africans, because they are used to hearing about conflict. But when it's in our countries, we do not ask the right questions. We are not as interested, deeply interested as we are for others. And that is what has to change. And understand that our fight is a fight with a system that has been here for 400 years. And if we want to change the reality of today, we have to start going about this issue in a totally different way. That's my take on that.
Awesome. Yeah. I think right on. I think we have to shape and be able to tell that. Kalanji, anything you wanted to add this first question?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with a quote from Huey P. Newton, the Minister of Defense of the Black Panther Party. One thing he said is, "I do not expect white media to give positive images of black people." Basically, right? One of the things that Fatima stated was choosing our battles, right? And that's the key word, battle. We must understand that we are at war, and we do not expect our enemies to paint a positive light of us, because of the fact that when they do that, then we become human. But they want us to look subhuman. They want us to look as if we're savages. They want us to look like we're terrorists, and we pray the wrong way, and we speak the wrong way, and we don't speak English good, and all this other stuff that the colonizers has taught us. The propaganda machine is it's part of the military arm, right? And it is part of conquering the people. If you miseducate, then it's easier for me to not look at you the same as I would look at my lily white brethren. You know what I'm saying? These old patriotic white folks. You know what I'm saying? That's why when you look at what's going on in with Russia and the Ukraine, the first thing they want to do is they want to paint these images of these heroic white folks. You know what I'm saying? They're sitting there, oh, look at these poor Ukrainians who are suffering. They're not telling you that they're neo-Nazis. They're not telling you that when Africans are trying to escape, they're being held back, or they're being punished, or they're being treated like second, third class citizens. So once we recognize that it is a war, and it's a war on African and other colonized people, then and only then will we be able to move forward. But it takes a special type of unity. We can't, I hear folks talk about, Africans unite. We're united in graveyards, cemeteries, we're united in jail cells, but we have to have functional unity. It has to go beyond just, us saying that, right on, I'm African, no more the hashtags. It's beyond the hashtag movement. We have to take this thing to a whole nother level. But again, we would be fools. We would be foolish if we expected those who live to conquer and dominate not only us, but the entire planet, to paint us in a human paint a human picture of us.
Mata, I see you just joined us. I don't know if you heard the first question, but I can repeat it for you, and maybe you can share a little bit. I was asking, is the Western media biased against Africa? And if so, why? So if you have a little to add, and then we'll go on to the next question.
Sorry, I just joined, so I didn't hear the contributions from the other speakers. But yes, I would say that Western media is biased against Africans. And again, it's power for the reasons of controlling a narrative. Media is incredibly pervasive and brainwashing. And it's an incredibly powerful tool that can be used to change history. itself completely changed history from the face of it. So I would say the reason why that media is biased towards painting a picture of themselves in a better light is for control and for power, not to take up too much time.
Yeah, I think everyone hit on the major points of like, yes, it is, right? And we know it because we're seeing constantly either the narrative being whitewashed or it's completely changed, or there is just a certain narrative that's constantly pushed and until it's actually manifested, or however they want to portray Africa, right? And so with that, I guess the second question is what is the role of the Western media and that they played in shaping the perception of Africa? So there is a perception about Africa when you go to Middle East, when you go to Europe, when you go to America. So what role did they play in shaping that narrative from a media perspective? And how is that having an impact on Africa as a continent, for us as a diaspora, and for people back home as well? Whoever wants to take that first step.
I can go. I would say that it's the idea of, as Meta was saying before, is the manufacturing of consent. Because poverty, war is a it's a bank, it's a money, it's a machine to make money, and you have to understand that it's important to keep this image that something terrible is happening out there that justifies, for example, countries like the United States to take billions to deposit for combating wars. They have to justify this money. Where does it go? And it has to go to a place where people need to be saved. And who are the people that need more saving in the world? Us in African countries, even if that's not true. And you see, but it's also our fault. And I want to highlight this. It's often when we say Africa is a continent. It has like 54 countries. When the Moroccans do not change their minds, it has 55. So we have to think that when someone says Africa and says, for example, we have an NGOs, you have NGOs everywhere. These are NGOs make millions. Some are even able to make billions for aid, which is aid for African countries. And sometimes they just come and say, we have a clinic in Africa. And someone hears a clinic in Africa, you think, oh, it must address 500 million people. Then you ask them, where in Africa do you have a clinic? And they'll tell you, oh, probably in the sub-Saharan, which is another racist term, because you do not say that countries are sub the canyon or above the canyon. You know what I mean? You say south, north, east, west. So, and you ask them again, okay, sub-Saharan where? And they will tell you probably South Africa. And then someone in South Africa, if we ask the right questions, other questions that you ask, where in South Africa? And they will say, oh, probably in the East Zone. So maybe this clinic only is able to address 100 citizens. But the idea is, and they probably receive the same amount of money that an NGO that addresses 100,000. You know what I mean? So we are the ones that have to start asking the right questions. Yes, it's beautiful to say One Africa, but the truth is, this is not working for us internationally. And it's not working for us because, first of all, it diminishes our issues, which contributes as well for the media to always seem that they are covering a lot and is an issue that is actually minimal. And these are the little things that we can start doing. It's asking the where, the hows of every single thing. And that is my take. I'll pass it
Yeah,
to someone
no,
else.
I think you bring a really good highlight to, they constantly attempt to portray Africa as one entity, right? And I think that's the problem.
Mhm.
is they're constantly trying to portray Africa, the poor, the dark, the tribalist, right? And that's the narrative they're constantly driving. And people just have, whenever you talk about, right, when we talk about Europe, right, people think about different areas, different places to visit, all these things. But when it comes to Africa, they have managed to portray this image that Africa is one entity, or one, giant thing that is this. And I think that's constantly what they're trying to communicate or show. Kalanji, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would only say two things. I would say one, and I agree with what the panelists are saying thus far. I would say that we have to not get it twisted. Meaning, we talk about the image that Western media has painted the continent, but that's wherever African people reside, not just on the 54 countries. You know what I'm saying? It's wherever we are, because don't get it twisted. You will hear folks talk about, well, I hear that Africans, I don't call myself African Americans, but Africans in America are lazy. Then you'll hear Jamaicans have 32 jobs, and Haitians practice witchcraft. And you know what I'm saying? This is all designed. It's not just, we're all looked at as quote unquote savage. And then we go to other oppressed people. Well, if they are Muslim, they are terrorists. You know what I'm saying? If they speak Arabic, then they must be, you understand what I'm saying? So we have to be careful. And when we talk about Africa, we have to, again, remember, as my brother Nebiu said, he said, come in as quote unquote immigrants. For all practical purposes, even the Africans and Americans came as immigrants because they came as chattel slaves. They came to be surplus labor. You know what I'm saying? Brothers and sisters over in Trinidad or in St. John and in St. Croix kidnapped against our will. But you know what I'm saying? Brothers and sisters over in Trinidad or in St. John.
There's
an
echo behind me.
Kidnapped against our will. Okay. But someone has a YouTube on or something. Okay. So whatever the case, my point in saying all this is we have to be clear and make sure that we don't play their role as well, because sometimes by default we've all been colonized to a great extent. Ethiopia hasn't been colonized, but there are plenty Ethiopian minds that have been colonized. So we got to separate the mind from the landmass. You understand what I'm saying? There's some folks, you'll see some brothers and sisters here in the state that may hold on to the tradition, whereas you go to another country and they don't acknowledge it. I remember a time when Africans on the continental Africans had the all natural look. And Africans here in the States, they had the European look. Now, to a great extent, we can't tell the difference. Why? Because of the fact that we're taught that we're not as beautiful as these other people. You understand what I'm saying? When in fact, we know we're the most beautiful people on the planet. But again, it's that propaganda that will take us and cause us to be on the wrong side of the barricades. So that's all I have to say on that.
Awesome. Nev?
Yeah, I absolutely second that. I mean, that was right on point. I do want to add that, and this is so true in the African community globally, there's still a popular misconception that anything written or seen on television is true. Or somehow Western news reporting in general is often portrayed as being neutral or impartial. And the journalist is also neutral, or somehow there's some kind of balanced arbiter. This is what we need to debunk. This is a huge myth which needs to be debunked, not just in Western societies, but within the African society, because I think maybe subconsciously or not, it does affect us. And what my brother said about our looks, trying to get to the European look, that's a subconscious influence of what we see and hear, and subconsciously really believing it. And within the mainstream media, it occupies a significant part of international discourse. And this media coverage has the capacity to influence public opinion and perceptions about key global issues. The Ukraine situation came up. The entire world is rightfully outraged, right, that Ukraine is invaded and all these terrible things are happening. But Ethiopia was attacked and has been under attack by this armed insurrectionist Eritrea all this year. There's been a bloody war against Ethiopia, but you don't hear about that. There's 7 million people displaced in it. 7 million. You know, there's no outrage, right? So that's the discrepancy that this creates. But even more dangerous than just perception, what I would like to point out is that this coverage, the nature of the coverage, may actually lead to this propagandation of misinformation, disinformation, and stereotypes. And this disinformation and stereotypes on people of African descent, unfortunately, informs Western government policymakers. Policy is made on perception, and especially on foreign policy, on decisions that are made about Africa. And those of you who've been paying attention to what's happening in Ethiopia, this past year and a half has been such an eye opener, at least to the Ethiopian community. It was like a big slap on the face, where we literally witnessed legislation being introduced in Congress based on a CNN report that later turned out to be false. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. How can you be a congressman, supposedly, your world history, and you're introducing a bill or a resolution based on a CNN report of one journalist that has bias or disinformation? This is what's happening. And if you look at Africa, and this policies that are being made affect real people. Sanctions has been passed on countries after countries, largely based on this kind of reporting, right? If you look at the sanction list, the current sanction list, 1/3 of the African continent is under some sort of sanction. Imagine that, 1/3. We have 1.2 billion people in Africa. 1/3 of them are being isolated from the rest of the world. Largely, I would argue, because of perception, because of Western powers not willing to recognize indigenous knowledge, indigenous way of living, trying to force upon a certain way of living, or trying to force upon compliance. There's this paternal feeling that Africa, the West needs to tell Africa what to do, and not just sanctions. We've seen actual bombings. We've seen in the 90s when Bill Clinton, for example, bombed Sudan. He bombed a factory because there was a report that they were producing nerve gas. Sudan is a poor country. After they bombed that place, it turned out that there was an aspirin factory, a medicine factory. You know how rare medicine difficulties in Africa? They completely destroyed it. You can look at Libya, the reports coming out of Libya during President Obama, that Gaddafi is this terrible monster, and his soldiers literally, I mean, you can go find these clips on CNN and many of the mainstream media. They were showing reports of allegedly Gaddafi soldiers using Viagra to gang rape women, and that the United States needed to go and rescue the people because these terrible soldiers were raping people and using Viagra. It turned out to be a hoax, the whole thing. The media never apologized, but the United States invaded and bombed Libya and committed a regime change. But look at Libya. This is an African country. Right now is a completely failed state where there is an active slave market today. African migrants from West Africa, from East Africa, attempting to cross over to Europe, go through Libya, they're getting captured and sold enslaved and sold in 2022. The media's coverage of Africans had a great deal to do with the things that led up to this kind of things. It's happening in Ethiopia right now. The disinformation, the misinformation, where rebels and terrorists are being painted as noble fighters, where people who are defending themselves are being seen as evil or as aggressors. It's completely convoluted and upside down. And this is the time for all of us to wake up and do this exactly what you're doing here, what we're doing here, and have this conversation and tell our own story, because we cannot let this continue to propagate. We cannot let this legacy pass on to our children and the next generation. With social media and with a lot of other things that we can do, we are empowered. We don't need nobody's permission to take action and reclaim our own story. So thank you.
Awesome. Anyone has anything to add?
Yeah, I would like to just emphasize or continue to emphasize what my brother was speaking about in terms of Western media having such a authority over the truth, balance, and being a neutrality in reporting. It's a huge issue that we have to continuously work on breaking that cycle of believing what it is or not being able to critically analyze and think about what it is that we're actually being shown. And I think it's important as well, as an educator myself, to start introducing critical thinking to young children through philosophy and even African tales and stories, because a lot of our stories for children have multiple characters, morals, and stories to impart critical thinking into young children. And I'll give you an example of something that happened in the UK. My toes, yeah. I'll give you an example of something that happened in the UK, which emphasizes this point. There was a young man who was unlawfully killed, a young black man that was lawfully killed in the UK. And the image of white males going through the streets holding bats on mainstream media was reported as fathers protecting the streets of London at the time from rioters that were rioting through the unlawful killing of this young man. And then when going on media that was controlled by African people from a Black perspective, it was actually National Front and an organization called the BNP, Black National Party, the British National Party in the UK, which are racist groups. These were white men who were actually on the streets looking to beat up and harm Black people at the time. So the same image on mainstream media of white males, fathers who were protecting the streets of London was actually completely diametrically the opposite of what was happening, which was National Front members actually on the streets trying to harm young Black men. So it's really important that our young people are able to decipher and to be able to understand why is the message being pushed, who is pushing the message, and what agendas do they have when doing so, is what I wanted to add to the conversation.
Thank you.
My look.
All right. I think it's a very important topic to bring about, right? Like how the media is portraying, because I think like Mita said, there is a certain narrative that's set already, and it seems like all they do is just push that narrative, right? And if we don't pause and say why, who, and for what reason, then we encourage it in a way, right? Especially in this era of social media, where we're constantly sharing everything that comes through, right? Like one clip, whether bad or good, we share it and just spread it all over. So we have to be very intentional, I think, on like what we're sharing, and and really do analysis of like what it is, why it's there, and how it has an impact on us in general. So I guess the next question I want to ask is, why is there no balance coverage by Western media when it comes to Africa? Because like I think we talked about it a little bit, and I think we all touched on it. But why is it? Why is it that they're not balanced? Why is it that, when they bring on sources, right? Like when they say, "Oh, we have expert about this," oftentimes they're not even Africans, right? It's either a Caucasian male or something. So there's always, they're not even coming to us and allow us to tell our story and to be able to provide that balanced report. So I guess, Fatima, if you want to go and take a stab at it first, and why do you think that's? And I think you, Mike, may be muted.
I think it has to do with the previous speaker was talking about. This is a job, and policy making analysts, it's a great job and pays very well. And you see that most of the African countries are still addressed, and we address ourselves, which is disturbing at some point when you realize we still address ourselves as Anglophones, Francophones, Lusophones, every phone. And you go to the United Nations sites, and you go to the European Union Commission, and you go to any NGO or whatever it is, any company, Deloitte, everything. You just have to know how to speak Portuguese. You don't have to know much more. Have a degree or have a master's or a PhD. And even today, you see that most of job applications today, they are not even requesting for masters. They are requesting for PhDs. And they select the universities of people that can become an analyst or can become a policymaker. And you think to yourself, who are the people our parents now manage to put through their children to have at least a degree? Some of us make it to have a master's. And you think about it, how many of us will be in their 30s with PhDs to get jobs at the level that then you are called to speak about certain issues? And then they ask for 10 years, 15 years of experience in most of the issues that are concerning African countries. And you, as an Ethiopian living in Ethiopia, or me as a person that was born of parents from Northwest Africa, I would have a different insight, and even more humane insight of what's happening. Plus the fact that I will have a degree that will help me add to the history. So I would be 10 times better than any other person. But the barriers are there. And you start seeing the barriers. This is money making. We are money people. Sorry for putting it out there like this, but it's the truth. And the truth is that policy making, and then you have the social and the political side of it. Who are the people that are at the bottom in every single country on earth? Us. And it's needed to keep this bottom, because you have cheaper labor, which is us. You have people that will not contest the system, which is us, because we'll have less people that will understand the system to then become active citizens. So you have all of this is a spiral of things that you see, and people often blame capitalism, and it is, and it's just a sad capitalism, which I'm not in favor of the system, but I'm not totally against it. I'm against it with the fact that it capitalizes on bodies of people that look like you and me, and that is the main issue. And that's why it's interesting to keep the narrative of Africans in every country, scapegoat and scapegoat them as criminals, as people that have less access to education, which then becomes the truth, because if you live in a poorer neighborhood, you'll have access to a poorer education, and you have an access to less opportunities. And that's it's the manufacturing, and consent starts at home. And how are we in each other's homes? through the television. That's why we are talking about the media.
Perfect. Kalanji, you have any additional thoughts on this?
Yeah, I live
And then,
here in Atlanta, in the U.S., right? And when anywhere in the U.S., whenever you turn on world news, it's the same news. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to hear about Congo. You're not going to hear about what's going on in Rwanda. You're not going to hear about what's going on in Mali. You're not going to hear about what's going on in Togo. You're not going to hear about what's going on in Sudan, unless they have some type of interest where they want to say that there's a terrorist front and we need to go in and be peacekeepers. We need to send in AFRICOM. We need to send in the EU. We need to send in NATO. We need the United Nations to come in on a peacekeeping mission. And those peacekeeping missions end up like Patrice Lumumba ended up. You understand what I'm saying? So we have to be perfectly clear that when we talk about media is ran by a small group of corporations. And these particular corporations are the same people who fund and fuel these particular governments, right? The United States is a corporation. The United States is ran by corporations. So you wonder why when someone goes to sue Johnson & Johnson, they get this fine. They get a fine for $1.4 million, $1.4 billion. And where does it go? It goes right back into their account. They make it look like it's something really going on, like there's some type of justice. But of course, there's no justice. In America, there's no justice on the planet when it comes to us. They don't care about Africa. You know what I'm saying? The only thing they are concerned about it when it comes to Africa is what resources can they suck up out of it? Can they get more gold? Can they get more cobalt? Can they get more diamonds? You know what I'm saying? What can we use? The Western world uses Africa much like, part of my English is that of a whore, an unpaid whore. You know, they come and they rape and ravage and savage and brutalize it and terrorize it, and until they can bleach it, and make it so that white folks can call themselves South African, so that white folks up in Egypt can say that they're not African. You understand what I'm saying? Because they came in on a colonizer ship and they came for that particular purpose. So there's no concern about Africa. There's no concern about Africa other than demonize it. And if you listen to these folks, you would think that none of the resources that we use all over the planet, you would think that Africa never saw that. You know what I'm saying? You would think that it came up out of some European store or something. You know, so you know, like I said, and that's their job, and we shouldn't expect them to fend for us until we regain our power, as the sister comrade said. Until we regain our power, then we will remain in the situation we're in, constantly asking, "Why aren't you inviting me to the dinner table?" They want you to come to the dinner table, but they want you to work at the table, or they want to end up eating you. You know, so yeah, there's no concern for us.
awesome. All right, Dr. Dabru, I think you wanted to interject here. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I missed you. I mean, lost you for quite a while. I'm glad you sent me an email with a new link. I was quite interested in the subjects that we have been talking about, the last three speakers in particular. So the distortion of news, I mean, I think it was, what is first name? Asfaw. What?
Nabiyu, yes.
Nabiyu Asfaw, yes. He mentioned about Libya and as an example, Sudan. It is not unbeknown to those who bombed it, by the way. They used the media as a pretext to do that. The British pharmaceutical industry, I mean, factory, which was put in the Sudan, it was Britain that actually had installed it. So Americans could not have unknown. I mean, they knew about that, but they did not want Sudan to produce drugs which would have made a tremendous advantage to the region. They simply did not want that. Of course, their general public would take an offense if they told them, well, we bombed the pharmaceutical industry. What they said was, well, this particular factory could be used to produce ammunitions. Even if that was the case, whose business is it to do that? So they bombed it to baffle their own, unthinking public, primarily. The same thing is true of Libya. Libya, probably the average Libyan, when he dropped out of school, was paid something like $1,000 to maintain him or her. They were given houses. There is no place on earth where that sort of provision was allowed. They hated that. He also wanted to say, well, from now on, we do not need the dollar or pound to exchange for our petrol. We might as well use gold, he said. It was 6 months after he had said that they finished him. So the media is used as a pretext. I'm not saying that the onus is not on us or Africans to be able to rectify that. At least Africans should not be fooled, nor should the general public be fooled. I'm cognizant of that. But it is not based on the media that such decisions are made. That's the point I want to say. They use them as excuse, as a pretext to do that. So that is the issue. But again, the onus is on us to be able to rectify all these things. It's a long way, but it has to start somewhere. And I'm glad there is a tremendous awakening among you young Africans, and I'm glad to be able to be part of you this time around. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think even earlier, I think when Kalandra was talking, I was reminded of the big plane accident that happened in Ethiopia. I think it was at 2019, I believe. And I think 150 something people died, and more than 30 plus were from Kenya. But all the international media continue, so which makes Kenya the only country that had lost the greatest amount of people on that plane. And so, but the stories they decided to highlight were all Western people, right? Like the fact that 30 something plus Africans died in that plane crash from Kenya was never a topic of discussion. It was more of highlighting the individuals from Europe and America and other places. And again, if we pay attention, right, and we see, okay, like really what happened on the ground, and then really compare it at what the West is portraying it or the mainstream media is portraying it, we're able to do that. But I think there is a greater work that needs to be done in awakening the younger generation and African descendants and Africans, being able to say, okay, this is what they're doing, and we have to pay attention to it. Fatima, you have something to add? Muted. You're on mute.
Actually thinking about that is our lives do not matter, and we have to start being more it's not aware. I think most people are aware, but you are often caught with the idea that not everyone is bad. But bad person, because we often hear, oh, not everyone is bad. Some Asians are good, some Europeans are good. Yes, there are good and bad people everywhere, but we know that. But the truth is, statistically, we, with the intersections of color, be you a woman or a man or gay or straight or whenever you are, wherever you are, as a trans, if you intersect with Black, the number of the violence that you see is 10 times worse than most of the other human beings on earth in every single country you go. So we have to start thinking that there is an issue. And of course, not everyone is bad, but we have to start thinking about ourselves. And because we are the ones that are always left behind. And you see now with the situation of Ukraine, You saw the situation with COVID-19. That if the Western world cannot deliver vaccines, what can they do? Because the only thing they are supposed to do is put the vaccines in a plane and deliver them. The worst was made. There was a time that we had no treatment. Be you against or in favor. The truth is, our people are supposed to have the vaccines in their countries and then decide for themselves if they want to take the vaccines or not. But we are being impeded to get those vaccines. So you see, even when it comes to a pandemic, we have been left behind. So we have to start worrying about ourselves and working on systems that are self-reliant and not being scared of being asked certain questions. I remember, for example, one of the interviews of Toni Morrison, when a French journalist asked her why she is not writing about white roles in society, and she answered them, because this is my reality, and I'm writing about my reality, and I'm writing about what I want to write. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but just the idea that everything you do has to have the center has to be a white person, and there you, an entire lifetime, write books and dare to not mention an European or a white person. So you see where the issue is, because they would never ask this to any white author. Why aren't they writing about Asians? Why aren't they writing about Europeans? So we have to understand that the issue is something that will not solve in 10, 20, 100 years. But we can solve it for ourselves, for our children, for our countries, if we start thinking about ourselves and understand the condition that we are, that it has been constructed and put it in place for us. And we are conditioned as darker human beings on this earth. And our leaders should look at us and be loyal to us. That is
Thank you.
the only way forward.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think we talked a little bit about why it is, and that they're in fact biased, and they have in a way shaped this perception about Africa. So I guess now, as we're concluding, I want to know, how do we then debunk this? How do we start correcting these narratives and start telling our stories and empower our generation, our brothers and sisters, and ourselves to start telling our story in the way that it should be told, right? And the way that it should be corrected. And so, Kalandra, I don't know if you want to start us off. How do we go about that, and how do we start doing that?
Well, funny you ask. We create our own platforms. We have a platform called Black Power Media, and through Black Power Media, we've been utilizing it as a tool, as a weapon, to make sure that we get proper information out. We make sure that we touch on the not just the continent, but the diaspora as well. We are a revolutionary platform. We're not here to please anyone. We're not here to tease anyone. We're telling it like it is. And on our platform, you will find interviews that we've done with everyone from Frantz Fanon's daughter to Patrice Lumumba's daughter. You'll find interviews with political prisoners from behind the wall, like Mumia Abu-Jamal. You'll find interviews with veteran members of the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army, the Young Lords, and so many other freedom fighters that exist, on the planet, who are against oppression, who are against tyranny. So it is up to us to decide whether or not we want to tell our own story. We know about the popular I don't want to say fable. What's the there's a piece pardon me, my brain is all over the place today. There's a piece where they talk about why does the lion always captured or killed at the end, and they said when the lion begins to write his own story, then the story will change. Basically, I just jacked it all up, but y'all know what I'm talking about. So, in essence, we have to decide to tell our own stories, and we already know CNN, Al Jazeera, NBC. None of these folks care anything about us. You know what I'm saying? Any platform that's ran by colonizers of African people, then we should pay no attention to, you know. So ultimately, we have to decide that just like what you're doing right here, right now, we have to begin to develop a United States of Africa. We have to decide that no longer am I set tripping off of invisible borders and boundaries. You're not Ethiopian, you're African. You're not from the Sudan, you're African. I'm not an African American, which I don't even know what the hell that means. You know what I'm saying? I am an African who was kidnapped and captured and held against my will. I'm not here. This wouldn't have been my first choice. Now, is that for me to say that Africa has no problems? Is it to say it has no issues? Absolutely, we have issues. We have issues all over the world. I mean, first and foremost, the fact that here we are, 4 African people, and we're speaking English. We're speaking the colonizer's language. That's the first problem. You know what I'm saying? So how do we expect? So I can only imagine the mindset of these Europeans when we walk like them, we talk like them, we act like them, and we say, well, why aren't you including us? You don't even want to include yourself in your own affairs. You understand what I'm saying? We can't look to the West to help us with the problems in Ethiopia. You know what I mean? That's an Africa problem. You can't look to the West to help with the problems in Rwanda because these are the bastards that started it. You understand what I'm saying? We can't look to the West to save the Congo. They're talking about the Ukraine. I mean, Congolese in the last 30 years, I mean, close to 10 million people murdered, genocide, and you don't hear nothing. You don't hear a peep about what's going on. Not a thing. You know what I'm saying? So until we decide that we love ourselves enough, because ultimately that's what it is. It has nothing to do with these. I mean, we don't even want these crackers in our business anyway. You know what I mean? They're part of the problem that we have right now. And this is what what's our brother name, our African brother, my brain, I'm all over the day. But anyway, I see his picture, but I can't think of his name. But he said they closed our eyes. They told us to close our eyes and pray. And when we had the land, but when we opened our eyes, they had the land, and we learned how to pray. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes just praying ain't gonna get it because they are praying on us while we praying. You know what I'm saying? We are the prey. So we got to change this thing around and show love and figure out how we're going to do this thing. I am honored to be on here with you. I really appreciate you thinking of me for including me in this convo with these great people. You know what I'm saying? It's a beautiful panel. And I just want to say thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Fatima, you're muted.
Thank you so much. And I think I can still speak on the subject.
Yes, of course.
Yes. Sorry, I thought we were running out of time.
No.
What I think is sometimes I think about the idea of creating a media that would centralize our stories, and that we'll have our journalists, and you will be able to broadcast from south to north, east to west. And I think that's very important. But then I think of who is going to sponsor this idea, and sometimes I don't know. Most of African states are still the leaders, and it's just the idea of creating a media broadcaster that will be then manipulated, and that is not what we want. We want a free media and be able to express what we think and have freedom of speech, and I think the only way forward is to find ways of financing a start to start. Because you see today, Al Jazeera in the beginning was not this news channel that everyone used to watch. It was like Al Jazeera had tons of barriers, and they were accused of being terrorists. There was an attempt of closing the channel. So and we will have it too. And but they grew, and they grew by creating, in the beginning at least, stories that were reliable, and more people could relate to them and reach them, because they were talking about everyone in the world, not just the same group of people. And we wanted to hear a different narrative. So I think today, not only us Africans, diaspora blood ones, the ones that do not consider themselves Africans, we all want to know about each other. And even the non-Africans also want to hear from us, because we are not the only ones that are tired of constant of this constant narrative, the constant fallacy. We are not the only ones that are tired of that. So we will find ways of creating our own narrative and have our own news broadcaster. But we have to organize and come together to do that. And we will need everyone on board from every single country in Africa. We'll need journalists. And even today, you don't even have to have a degree to be a great journalist, because after everything that we've been seeing on TV, we I wish they had no degree, because otherwise I wouldn't go after them in the same way that I go. So if kids have a camera today, sometimes they bring out the news much better than these people with their degrees and everything. So what we want is a neutral media broadcaster that will centralize African stories, and will bring our narrative even more in areas of conflict that we are so often dehumanized and demonized, and we see our even more African men, they are constantly being put in a position that is it's very sad, and we have to think about our children, because sometimes you forget to think about our parents and our grandparents, but we have to think about our children. Tomorrow might be my child that will be accused of being a criminal and being accused of being a rapist, and they will often not being dealt with justice. It's just like, because there is this consent that was given 400 years ago that we are a certain thing, that we are a black dot, a monolithic group. So it's easier to demonize us. So we need this media broadcaster to be a project that it has to happen.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Deborah, you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you very much. Fatima's point is extremely inspiring. I remember a fellow Ethiopian who used to work for the World Bank say, I would commit tens of my income if we could have an African medium, he said. I said, for the rest of my lifetime, I will dedicate 10% of my income. And that's a very, very important point. Very, very crucial. They imagine what Israel did. I mean, the Jews, they have been for 2,000 years, they have seen the worst of human maltreatment. But they exacted revenge once they got their acts together. They created their independent nation. Not a single person can say a single thing without receiving a barrage of reprimand from that small country. And here we are, at least 1.1 billion blacks. I am fortunate enough to live in a black man's land, beautiful place. I have the good fortune of living in 4 continents. The finest place on earth is where I am. It's God's own creation, I say, this part of the world. So we need that. Absolutely. And that is a very, very crucial point Fatuma raised. We need one. And the wealthy Africans understand there is a Sudanese man, one of the wealthiest, Dangote in Nigeria. There are quite a number of Africans, but even if each one of us contribute $5, we could run a medium of our own. We don't have to really much about the West. What we need to do is to fortify our own people, the youth, those who have been made to believe. There is a tremendous fear of what our adversaries have done to us. They know the strength of the African in every department, in every department. Dubois wrote some 60, 70 years ago, he said, when he joined Harvard University, blacks were allowed from different parts of the United States. And he said, they were a bit rough, he said, in everything. But in every department, they excelled. In every department. So they fear the black man. They know our history. Who mentioned earlier on, the first speaker, I think, who talked about Sheikh Anta Diop. Until Diop wrote that book, The African Origin of Civilization, worthless European scholars used to put one rubbish after another about Africans. He was a physicist that he could determine every single thing he said by examining it, but what they call carbon atom dating. He was a physicist as well as a historian and a great Egyptologist. Guess what happened? In 1985, there was a conference in Dakar, in Senegal. He was not invited. And his laboratory, his university was just a mile or so away from it. Intentionally, Senghor, on the orders of his white masters, did not invite the greatest thinker of our time. So we need the Africans to know their own stories. And you raised a very, very important point, Fatima. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, I think having our own media, but also telling our story and empowering our family, right? It's our daughters, our sons, our brothers and sisters being able to tell their story. And so I think Fatima mentioned about Qatar and how they came up with Al Jazeera, I believe, right? And I think prior to that, they were antagonized about everything, but then they set that up, and really nowadays they tell their story. And you see how powerful it is. So they are sort of represent that the Arabs media where they have, and they're able to tell their narrative, their stories, and so I think that we need to do that, and I think it's overdue, in fact. And so we have to be able to start telling our stories. And so, and then I think Kalanje mentioned about having the power of media, and I really encourage everyone to follow Black Media House. I think that's very important to be able to support one another and be able to do that. So I encourage everyone to check it out. All right,
Yes.
so
Black Power Media, yes.
Black Power Media. I probably said it wrong. Huh?
It's all good. We together.
And Facebook and YouTube as well, right?
Yeah. So, and I also, real quick, I want to invite you all. We have over a dozen different hosts on our particular platform with different shows. So it's not just one show. We also have a morning show as well. But I invite you all not only to check it out, but you may want a show on the platform as well. The platform is a year old, but again, we've had everyone from a Cornell West to all in between. So it's like we are, again, pro-African, and Cornell might have been the softest African we had on there, but otherwise, we definitely, our goal is not to just be a quote unquote YouTube channel. Yes, we're looking at the Al Jazeera's, we're looking at some of these other platforms because of the fact that we are absolutely confident. We know with a surety that we come from we're the inventors, we're the progenitors. You know what I mean? So we have faith that in 5-10 years, we'll definitely be a force to be reckoned with. So we invite you all.
Awesome. So please do check it out. And so again, I want to thank you, everyone, the panelists, Fatima, Klanje, and the others that left. Your inputs are really powerful. Fatima, you have any last minute thing you wanted to add?
No, I just want to thank. I think this is great, and I think just the fact that you are creating this space already helps a lot with the media idea and helps them to understand what we think, and that this is great. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Kalanje. Thank you, Fatima. Me and Dr. Deborah are going to continue on a different topic, but thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Cool. Thank you. Fatima, we getting kicked off. Let's go. All right. Take it easy. Peace.
All right. Have a good one. Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Debru. I know you wanted to interject a little bit about media, because I think it's such a powerful topic and something that, something that we have to continue to work on and hopefully find a way to be able to bring in, come up with our own media so that we can tell our story and correct that narrative. So I wanted to, I guess, introduce you just a little bit, and then maybe if you wanted to add more, and then we can go on to the topic of the bottle of Adwa.
Thank you.
So yes, Dr. Debru has fled home from Ethiopia over 4 decades ago. He worked in over 11 different countries. He is an expert in medicine. He's lived in Netherlands before, Great Britain as well. He's been practicing as a physician, an academic, and a medical advisor. He's also a pilot. So what a wonderful combination. I'm very excited to have you and to be able to have this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerusalem. Thank you.
Of course. So if you wanted to add anything that I missed out, please go ahead, and then we can have you start.
Not at all. Incidentally, your father's name is my grandfather's name, my grandfather was born when his father came back from Adwa. So he was an Adwa child. He would have been 126-year-old, my great-grandfather, by the name of Kibrat Tasamma, by the way. So, yeah, it's interesting. Kibrat, yeah.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I know today you wanted to share a little bit about the Battle of Adwa, Imperial Menelik,
right.
and Empress of Tai too. So such a powerful story that hasn't been told yet, I feel. And I think there's a lot of people who don't understand it and should understand it so that they feel empowered enough that we too have queens and kings before that was disrupted. And because of those queens and kings, we were able to maintain our independence and be able to be a symbol of freedom and hope for Africa as well. So please go ahead and yeah.
Thank you very much. I am extremely pleased to be part of this august panel and speak on Africa History Month. Let me start off with a few remarks about this enigmatic black nation, Ethiopia, before I delve in the victory of Adwa. Ethiopia is believed to be the oldest nation on earth, with something like 8,000 years of uninterrupted history. So the history of Ethiopia, obviously the history of Africa itself. The ancient Greeks revered Ethiopians profoundly. They, in fact, dubbed them as the most just people in the world and as the furthest of mankind. And that was ancient Greece. Along with China, Greece, Persia, present-day Iran, Ethiopia was one of the 4 most powerful nations on earth, ancient world. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned Ethiopian queens, Jerusalem. In fact, Ethiopia's mighty queens include for instance, Candace, who defeated the advancing Roman army at Meru in present-day Sudan in 23 BC, checked the Roman southerly colonial expansion. In other words, she saved the continent. It was an Ethiopian queen in 23 BC. She destroyed the Roman garrisons and took the captives as slaves. These are concealed in European history books, but they're there anyway. Some of Ethiopian phenomenal rulers indeed were women. The 25th dynasty in Egypt had quite a number of pharaohs, Ethiopian pharaohs, and some of them were women, by the way. So no wonder one of them, a man called Sabakon, for instance, he is the first person who abolished the death penalty nearly 3,000 years ago, an Ethiopian pharaoh of Egypt of the 25th dynasty. The 25th dynasty was an Ethiopian dynasty in which some 18, according to Homer, 18 Ethiopians ruled that country then. So Egypt, which had the good fortune of living in and working for about 2.5 years, was a black country until others, Arabs, Europeans, moved in the last some 2,000 years. So Ethiopia not only espoused Judaism for thousands of years, it also is the first country where the other Abrahamic religions, Christianity and Islam, were practiced in freedom without any persecution. Now, it says a lot. When Christianity was brought to Europe, thousands of Romans were killed because they were Christians. Similarly, in Islam, thousands were killed as well for being non-Muslims. But Ethiopia received both Christians and Islam peacefully, and those religions were worshipped in freedom longer than any other country in the world. It's also the only country in Africa that has its own alphabet, and a very advanced one at that. That is, incidentally, something which the present rulers of Ethiopia, who are being supported by the West in completely undoing the country, are up against. They are up against our flag, against the Ethiopian character, the Ethiopian alphabet. They had the audacity to take European alphabet, the Latin, which is extremely deficient, to be able to transliterate any of the Ethiopian languages. And they are actively being supported by the West, the Tigray Liberation Front and the Oromo Liberation Front, which are misruling the country at the moment and are completely against the ethos of Menelik, who have virtually installed apartheid in a black nation, are thoroughly being supported by the West. So let me quote Raymond Jonas, a Harvard professor of history, who wrote an authoritative book with the same title on Adwa. It's the Battle of Adwa. He said, in March 1896, a well-disciplined Ethiopian army did the unthinkable. It routed the invading Italian forces and brought Italy's war of conquest in Africa to an end. He added, in an age of relentless European colonial ambition, Ethiopia had successfully defended its independence and cast doubt upon unshakable certainty of age that sooner or later all Africans would fall under European rule. But what he probably didn't know is the same Ethiopia which had deflated the arrogance of Europeans had done the same thing 2,000 years earlier against the Romans. The Romans, which were reckoned to be the master race, were humiliated by black Ethiopians in 23 BC. Menelik and Empress Taitu, his wife, along with Ras Makonnen, the father of the late Haile Selassie, the mighty general, were among the military genius who masterminded every step of the war path. Over 100,000 proud, militant, peasant Ethiopian army were assembled from across the whole nation. Imagine at a simple call address of the emperor, where we had no television, no radio, by word of mouth, he declared the war against Italians. And they assembled in a span of a few months over 100,000 men and women who marched as far as 1,000 kilometers on foot to the battleground and routed the Italians. Over 7,000 of them were slaughtered. We lost as many, and some 5,000 were taken captive. That in itself was a formidable feat. Empress Taitu led 5,000 men strong, probably the first in history. She led an artillery unit, encouraging the youngsters, should you die, I'll take care of your children. That's what she used to say. And the Battle of Adwa largely was her work, her mental work, her indefatigable spirit, and contempt for everything European. There were some 3,000 women in combat duty as well. Those were nursing wounded individuals, and they maintained the firearms of the men as well. So the global consequence of Adwa, the victory of Adwa, among others, it emboldened other nations of color. Japan, for instance, took on the imperialist Russia, emboldened by what Ethiopia had done, and routed the Russian army 10 years later. The entire colored race of the world was incited by what Ethiopia had done. Adwa became a symbol of resistance across not only the black nation of Africa and the entire world, from Africa, America to the Caribbean, Arabs, Asians, they all were extremely encouraged by that, what Ethiopia had done. So the impact was enormous indeed. Magnanimous Menelik led some 5,000 Italian troops, including their mercenaries, to go home freely. At a time, Europeans were ruthlessly massacring prisoners of war. That was the great African magnanimity and humanity. In fact, in many European countries, after the Battle of Adwa, particularly Eastern Europeans, pregnant women decided to call their sons, if they gave birth to sons, to give the name Menelik. There were thousands of people, some 50, 60 years ago, from Eastern Europe with the name Menelik. Even Italians themselves used to say, Viva Menelik. So he was an adorable human being as well. So personally, two great-grandfathers of mine, grandparents of mine, fought in Adwa. And as I mentioned to you earlier on, Jerusalem, one of my grandfathers was born while the war was raging in Adwa. So he would have been 126 years today. But the Western world never forgave Ethiopia for what it did, for deflating European supremacist mindset. To this very day, we have never been allowed to be able to tell our own story. I taught at many medical schools in Africa, And every time I went to a blackboard, I scribbled their names in our alphabet, transliterated in our alphabet. And I used to ask them if there is anything that struck them. And they used to tell me, but you never, I would exactly pronounce it the way they told me. And I say to them, would anybody have written your name without asking you how your names are spelled? They said no, invariably. And I could exactly transliterate it and let them hear how I said it, how it's pronounced. And I say to them, this is an authentic Ethiopian black alphabet, superior to any. The Latin alphabet has got 5 vowels. We have got 8, I told them. That is how sophisticated it is. And when I was at a Dutch medical school studying in my 4th language, it was easier to take my lectures in my language, in my alphabet. It was so much quicker than to write it in Latin. As the only black student in a class of 200, they thought I was writing, using a shorthand, because I could exactly pronounce it the way I heard it. So this is a superb language, and today Ethiopia's rulers are bent on destroying it. They are using Latin alphabet. They have demonized the Ethiopian flag, which defeated European powers, not once, but several times. The Ethiopian flag is the oldest flag on earth. And the present leaders of that country are bent on precisely destroying it at the best of their masters elsewhere. So that Ethiopia had a central role in the liberation of Africans from colonial yoke has earned the country the West's relentless hostility. That is why Western nations fully support the avowedly anti-Ethiopian Tigrayan and Oromo secessionist groups who are committing overt genocide against the country's most notable anti-imperialist, the Amaras. They are bent on as well destroying the oldest religions, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the Ethiopian Islam, which have been ferociously against colonial attempt to be able to subdue that country. So that is what Adwa has brought us. That is why the Tigray and Oromos, whose support from the West is virtually a matter of routine. They are frantically attempting to fragment the oldest nation state on earth. I say it frantically because they can't, although they have got the full support of countries like the United States, Britain, and virtually all their allies. That is why the West condoned the secession of Eritrea, which has been part and parcel of Ethiopia for thousands of years. Indeed, some Oromo clerics are in collaboration with some German Protestant churches are attempting to remove the word Ethiopia from the Bible. There has been, I think, some 42 references to the word Ethiopia in the Bible. It's probably one of the most quoted nations in the Bible. They want to change that one as well and give it something else, Kush. Imagine, someone mentioned earlier on, Ethiopia is actually the first Christian nation on earth. It is a European version of the story that Ethiopia took to Christianity in the 4th century. That's not true. The first Christian took to Christianity while Christ was still alive in Jerusalem, the Ethiopian eunuch. He was the treasury minister of the Ethiopian queen of that time. So Christianity entered Ethiopia while Christ was still there. It only became a state religion in the end of 3rd century. So they do not want to accord Ethiopia its rightful place. So they call it the second oldest Christian nation on earth. But it is, Christianity was practiced, as I said, while Christ was still alive. So, well, that's what I wanted to say. Well, as I said, I had lived in Egypt for about 2 years. And someone mentioned about Cleopatra. Cleopatra is, and she's a woman of Greek extraction. She was a European. She was not at all a Greek. I mean, an Egyptian. Nefertiti and hundreds of others, and extremely beautiful queens, were not highly adulated in Egypt because the Egyptians, the Egyptians aren't Egyptians at all. They have lived in that country, but they are not authentic Egyptians. The authentic Egyptians are about 4 million in the south. So they try to appease the Western market. They want to please, Caesar had acquired Egypt for a while. Cleopatra was there. They have built statues for Cleopatra and Caesar. So primarily, because Europeans are so conceited, I mean, they like as if they suffer from some sort of inadequacy. So people go to Egypt to see, I mean, the statues of Cleopatra, but Cleopatra is, she's a man-like person. In fact, she doesn't even look like a beautiful woman. I mean, it's a question of taste. But yeah, so that's all I wanted to share with you, Jerusalem.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Doctor. We really appreciate it. I think it's there are many untold stories, and many of them very powerful, empowering for our generation. As we come together to trying to tell our story and correct the narrative that's already set for us. So thank you for doing that. And you touched on a little bit about the media, right? They're constantly amplifying the voices of these ethnocentric separatists, whether it's in Ethiopia or Nigeria or wherever it may be. It's done intentionally because that's the way to destabilize African country that are on the rise and trying to self-sustain themselves, right? Because I think when we talk about Ethiopia, we know about the great Renaissance dam that just started generating power, and we've followed that story as how it turned into now a proxy war on Ethiopia, backed with US, backed with Egypt, backed with other partners, and constantly amplifying those voices, anti-Ethiopia voices, while continuously silencing. We talked a little bit about portraying Africa as one entity, right? Constantly, or the poor, the hungry, the one that are fighting each other. We also talked a little bit about the Western media bringing Western experts to talk about our stories, and that has such a great impact, because I personally have been following that story and have seen the impact that media has, because they will bring on these experts that have anti-Ethiopia rhetorics or that promote divisive rhetoric, so-called expert or journalist that they bring on and see this national media. And, it has you wonder sometimes, is there no Ethiopian professor? Is there no Ethiopian historian? What is going on? And so I think those are good questions to ask as we're trying to correct that narrative and tell our story and empower our brothers and sisters to do the same.
Absolutely. And they are not unaware of that. I questioned when I was in Europe on many occasions. I said, how dare you invite someone who has just been to Europe, to Africa, barely spent a year or two, who does not speak the language, have nothing to do with the community and portray such figures, parades them as authorities. I challenged a news medium, a Dutch one, on one occasion. Guess what they said to me? Oh, we wanted to avoid bias. When an African speaks with authority on something he knows so much about, suddenly he becomes biased.
Right.
No? So that is a pretext, actually. They do not want to hear the truth. Mugabe was banned from speaking on any public platform when he appropriated the land which had been appropriated unjustly by foreigners. So there was a land restitution exercise. He wanted to speak to the European public. They never allowed him. You know, the Russian medium, Russia Today, is banned in a number of places. In America, it's banned. Americans who can't have their voice heard in the mainstream media utter their voices in Russia Today. And many Americans who would have benefited immensely from that one are completely denied that. They do not want the truth to be heard, because the truth will definitely free the masses. They don't want that. Absolutely. So, you know, unless indeed, as you said, we have our own medium. Are you aware of the this paper called The New African? There is one journal, The New African. It's in existence, I think, for about 45 or 6 years. Brilliant paper. It has not grown wide and fast, but that is about the only printed medium that we have. But we need, in this day and age, when every country launches, with all the difficulties that we may have, I think that would be a powerful thing to be able to have that. And we can completely debunk quite a number of stories. I mean, people are talking about skin color and that sort of thing. These are biological. When I was a medical student in Holland, as I said, I was the only black student. And the professor of histology, that is tissues, he asked the white students what they thought about my skin. He asked them, the cells that actually convert a particular protein called tyrosine into melanin, into color, are called melanocytes. So they are actually populating our skin. And he asked them whether or not they thought the numbers of cells that I have were more than the white man's. And they all said yes, that I had more white cells, melanocytes, to be able to convert the protein into that thing. He said, no, that's not true. Per square inch, I and the white folks have got the same number of cells. The only distinction, he said, is mine are active and theirs are lazy. So in other words, the color of Africans, virtually all humans are Africans to begin with. They left this part of the world some 60,000 years ago. They all were black because they call it selective advantage. There was no advantage. At the equator, having a black skin would protect me against the UV light, which is a cause of cancer. We are protected by it. That's why white folks are 10 times more likely to acquire cancer of the skin if they live in sunny environment. So it is a selective advantage. It was an advantage to save us from the scorching sun. So the further you go away, the lighter we become. The same thing with the form of our hair. Every single thing is a biological adaptation that has nothing to do with anything as such. So now Africans bleach their skin, this beautiful skin, unaware of what they do to themselves. So there is a lot we can do if we have got our own medium. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's the next step, and hopefully many are listening and they will take the necessary step to be able to help that in that area. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Dr. Dabro, again for joining us and sharing your wealth of knowledge. We really appreciate it. And we hope to have you next time as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would be very happy to speak as well on what we eat and drink.
Awesome.
That is absolutely crucial. I have a colleague, an African colleague. We met in a conference, I think in London somewhere. And as you know, Ethiopians were very selective in what we eat. And when I refused, she said, I would always say, she said, did my grandmother eat that? She would never touch anything that her grandmother did not eat. So it says a lot about our food habits as well, which have completely gone hayward at the moment. So we need to be to go and emulate the good habits of our ancestors in very, very many ways. So I would be very, very happy to speak on that as well. So thank you very much, Jerusalem.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again,
My
thank
pleasure.
you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us. Up next, we'll have Fatima talk about intersection of democracy and tribe. But before that, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of a video from the founder of African History Month, Daniel. And then when we come back, we'll go ahead and talk to Fatima.
Hello, greetings everyone, and greetings to the African diaspora, to Africans in the African continent, to Africans in the Caribbean, in the Pacific. Today is a very important day. We are celebrating the second African History Month. And the African History Month is an annual event to celebrate the achievements of people of African descent, and also acknowledge Africa's enormous contributions to the world civilization. On this momentous day, we are also celebrating 126th Adwa victory, which is a very significant African history. On this day, the Ethiopian forces led by King Menelik II humiliated the Italian invaders and defeated them in the Battle of Adwa. And this Battle of Adwa is the hallmark for Pan-Africanism. It empowers people of African descent to believe that we, united, can defeat enemies. And this is why the United States of Africa has been promoting and encouraging Africans all over the world to unify. Even amidst crisis in Ukraine, we have seen horrifying scenes of Africans being brutalized, being racially discriminated just because of the color of their skin, being blocked from boarding trains, being blocked from crossing European borders just because they are black. This is very disgraceful, and it has just shown the kind of people that they are, and we need as Africans to prioritize our interests. It's even laughable to see African countries lecturing Russia and yet these African countries are falling behind in evacuating their civilians. The lives of Africans have to be treated with the same kind of respect and dignity, and our leaders have failed us. We need to see a new kind of leadership that puts the interests of the African people first before any other interest. We know that Europeans will always fight and defend European interests. So why not Africans stand together and defend African interests, defend Caribbean interests, defend Pacific interests? Because wherever people of African descent are, we are facing systematic anti-black racism just because of the color of the skin, and we have to use what they're using against us for our own benefit, to advance common interests of having a unified Africa that is strong enough to build the infrastructure that we need, so that we don't witness a situation where African students are being trapped in European borders, being trapped in foreign countries in their quest to seek for quality education. The new kind of education that Africans need is the education that is going to enable them, empower them to solve the challenges that Africa is facing, to solve real-time problems. The United States of Africa has been providing leadership in terms of defining the foreign policy for Africa. And as United States of Africa, we are least interested in European affairs. We are least interested in whatever is happening in Ukraine and whichever country where there is conflict in Europe. We are not interested. The only thing where we are interested in is where Africans are involved. We call for the African Union to take measures to evacuate all stranded Africans from Ukraine. We also call upon African leaders to take the life of their citizens seriously and take immediate action to evacuate their citizens from war-torn Ukraine. I believe that Pan-Africanism is the only way, is the only solution that will bring solutions to the challenges that Africa is facing, that will bring the economic progress that Africans have been yearning for. And through our unity, we'll be able to build the infrastructure that Africa needs. We'll be able to build our own technologies and create an Africa that is built to succeed, and not an Africa that is built to depend on foreign countries, foreign economies. We need a new Africa that is capable of solving its own problems and taking heads on its challenges. The kind of leadership that we need in Africa is the leadership that will collectively drive Africans into rapid technological and economic progress. The United States of Africa Technology and Innovations Department has mobilized Africans to work towards creating innovative solutions towards African problems, and we are making significant progress, which is very encouraging. And today, as we celebrate and commemorate Adwa victory, let us leave it. Let us leave the Adwa spirit. Let the spirit of Adwa be amongst us, so that we can completely discard the colonial mentality that makes Africans believe that we cannot survive without the West. we Africans have countless resources. We have talented young people who are very skilled, and this is the time to utilize what we have to build a united and prosperous African nation, an African nation that will ensure every African has access to quality education, that every African has access to quality healthcare, and to ensure that the lives of Africans are protected and secured at home and abroad. The United States of Africa strongly condemns racial discrimination and denigration of Africans in Ukraine. We call upon the Europeans to value the African lives the same way they value European lives, because those that claim all lives matter, they are the same people that discredit the pains, the anguish, and the lamentations of Black people that are complaining about systematic racism, discrimination, and brutalization by the Europeans in Ukraine and also in Poland border. We demand that Africans be treated with the same kind of respect and dignity, just like any other refugees. And we encourage Africans to embrace the Pan-African solidarity. Let us work towards realization of United States of Africa. Thank you very much, and I am very hopeful that this year's African History Month will be more impactful, and many Africans will continue to embrace the African History Month. Wherever you're joining from, thank you for listening, and join us throughout the African History Month.
Awesome. Daniel, he's the founder of African History Month, as well as United States of Africa. Great message there for us. Now we're going to bring back Fatima. Thank you again for joining us. I think you may be muted. Yes, I can hear you. She's here, and she's going to share with us the intersection of democracy and tribe. So I'll leave it up to you. And
I would actually like for you to stay if you are interested.
I'll be here.
This is more of a conversation, even more because I talk about the subject because of the discontent of mostly today of Ethiopians with the system that is in place, and I believe that there's also a misconception and a misunderstanding of democracy because it's such a new system to African countries. That's why I decided to speak about it, of the intersection that we can have of democracy and tribes, and what we need to do in the future to accommodate this system, but make it ours, which we haven't done yet. Though Ethiopia has done a lot, because you changed your constitution, which is an act of bravery that few dare to do. And you must understand 30 years ago that this was not working for us. And it does not mean, I can even start the conversation now, it does not mean that that the system that was chosen is perfect. Utopias are illusions, they are dreams. And democracy is not an adjective, it's a verb. It's something that you practice every day. And I think the system that Ethiopia adopted, it's actually one of my favorites, and this might sound controversial to a lot of Ethiopians, but coming from the Northwest, where our major issue is that we easily adopt democracy somehow. And you see countries, Mali, Guinea, and Senegal, and even Ghana and Nigeria, that have accepted immediately this democracy. And they have adopted it with what Professor Nebu, Nebu, I don't want to butcher his name, was talking about, that we have adopted colonial structures more than actual democracy, which is the case as well of Ethiopia, that, as Mahmoud Mandani once put it, we thought that Ethiopia would have escaped the colonial structure of democracy due to the fact that we were never, in fact, colonized. But then you adopted in the 90s an education that was mostly European and did not reach everyone, because the people of the bottom could never participate, and the people from that had from lower incomes didn't have money to access an European education. And this is to say that my favorite revolutionary is Amilcar Cabral, because he's last is a person that does not ever does not it he preached more about working with the reality of our lands, which we do not see, and we are full of ideologies most of the time instead of having practical approaches to our issues as Africans. And the major issue for me with democracy today is not the fact that, for example, democracy has at least 6 pillars that we believe that we have to uphold international human rights law. That is the main thing. Even though we have to understand that the Declaration of Human Rights was written when we were still objects. They might say that we are subjects, but we were not, because if the Bill of Rights and the humanitarian propaganda, which I often call, sorry, because we were only free in 1968 as colonial subjects. We became people 20 years after the Declaration of Human Rights, which was the declaration was written in 1948, and in 1968 we were allowed to exist without mandates and creating our own systems. But we were only allowed to have our own systems if we transplanted the systems from Europe. And that is a major issue, because we had nations within squares after the Berlin Conference. And the nations within squares not only speak a different language, but have a different custom, they have a different tradition, they have a different religion, are very different from the issues that they often compare our countries with European countries and the United States, and how the colonial settlements, which is Canada and Australia, made it, and we did not make it. We didn't make it because we have nations within a country. We do not all speak English. We do not all speak Pular. We do not all speak Swahili. We do not all pray in the same way. So our issues are real and are very different from anything else. And we are the only ones that can address them. But how can we do it with the system of democracy that has been transplanted? And that's my question, which I often question other people, is how do we uphold a multi-party system if often you address people with a language that is not only foreign, but it's not even taught to most of the population? You have, for example, the example of Mali with the recent coup, because Mali, they attempt to say that Mali has that 5% of the people speaks French, which is considered the legitimate language. But that is not true. 40% of the people speak Bambara, which is the language that they managed at least to make other tribes to speak. But then you have the north of Mali, where no one speaks Bambara. Most people do not speak, not even the language that was adopted as bridge with other tribes in Bamako. And that is the issue that we have in most African societies from the north and the east, is that you cannot participate in a system where you are supposed to be equal, and then you do not understand the system because you have a language barrier, because you have a different custom, because you have a different tradition. And besides that, you not only have all of these differences, but you also do not see yourself in the constitution that was written. And that is the difference between Ethiopia and Nigeria from other countries. Because even though Ethiopia still has a long way to go when it comes to recognizing people and addressing their customs and their traditions and make them law and be able to even to communicate, because we are often selfish. Even me, I was born in a European country. I tend to go somewhere, which I do not, as a person, I do not do it. But I often tend to see in my sisters and friends of mine that we adopt this imperial position of telling others how things are done, without seeing that so much has been done with so little. And sometimes we are very unfair, and we do not address the social inequalities and inequities that are often so simple to understand, which is often communication. And democracy is supposed to be about people being able to communicate with each other, understanding the system that they are being ruled by. So this is to say that that's why you have a multi-party system that is often problematic, because you have a poor social structure. And from a poor social structure, you'll have a poor social contract. And the colonial structures that we have in position do not allow us to implement laws that address the issues of our populations. First of all, it's not it's not the fact that they not only do not allow you, but they do not even put the effort in researching about the issues that are that correspond to the majority of the population, because it's not in their interest to do that. Their interest is to have a position, receive their money in the end of the month, and have their children in colleges abroad, and that's it. And then you have the coup d'etats that often come from social inequality, social inequity, and inexistent voters. Because if you do not know your system, how can you even think about voting? When you vote because someone told you to go and vote, but it does not mean that you understand the system. And you have also the elected representatives. They often, we don't even know who they are. Who are they? You know that they belong to a certain class, and it's often the same class that comes from nepotism. And that is also detrimental for a multi-party system. You have most of our leaders, at least in the Northwest, they do not present themselves with a plan for development. The plan that they have is a plan that was written by someone by the United Nations or someone from any other organization. Even the system of voting, most of the time, is put in place by foreign nations. And you had The third thing is the democratic voting system, which is you are supposed to have equal rights to vote. If you have a system or a country that lacks in forms of transferring information, transferring education, it's very hard for us as citizens in an African country to be seen as equals, because the truth is the levels of illiteracy are very high in most African countries. I think 5 African countries can score 90%. And then you also have to believe that the system that does the evaluation of these systems in these countries is actually evaluating the right things. And this is, and then they ask you to go and vote regularly in every situation. You saw, like in Europe, you had COVID, and all of a sudden, most countries had to postpone their elections. But in African countries, we have war, we have conflict. And this is still an environment to have elections. So we have to be aware of the double standards and what has been asked of us as people. Obviously, I believe that the elections must be free and fair. But how can they be fair if most of the people that are being asked to vote in a system that gives them so little to nothing? So most of this conversation is about, it's a question that I think we should be asking to ourselves. Is it fair? Is the system that we have in place fair for the quality of education that we have, for the quality of information that we receive? Other thing is the rule of law, God. We have adopted, most African countries, so the so-called Anglophones and Francophones, common law and civil law, which is Roman Christian law, and it's interesting for Christian nations and nations that have adopted Christianity. But let's think about the people. They are atheists, they are Muslims that have kept their religions before Christianism, before Islam, and they are all been ruled by a law that holds Christian principles. And it's not that Christian principles are detrimental for them. It's more that they have a different religion, and that should be acknowledged in the system of law. And most countries are very, very backwards when it comes to change the system of law. And some of them do not even acknowledge that this is an issue. And it makes it hard to vote in a system that law-wise it's already designed to be unfair with you, because it does not recognize you. Even countries like Mali, that 95% of the population is Muslim. So you can see where the discontent of these human beings, where it's coming from, and how the media portrays and makes it like a small issue, but is not. And these are the little things that we have to start questioning, why there is always conflict. And it often has to do with the poor social contract that they have. I'll go to the fifth, which is like democratic governance, the importance of having separation of powers within a democracy. and to make sure that we have a balanced power. And it's important to have the separation of the executive, legislature, judiciary, to make sure that we have a transparent and we can seek for accountability from our leaders. But this is not often true, and the judiciary is most of the time corrupt, or it's a very unreliable system, and we do not see countries even having the rule of law and a judiciary as priority, and it's detrimental for our countries and for the citizens in African countries, due to the fact of the new idea of pushing for development, and and we need to develop fast, and this idea that we have to catch up with the 21st century, and we'll have foreign intervention, we'll have foreign investment, everything that development is supposed to bring. But then how do we hold accountable incongruences? How do we hold accountable illegalities? And you will not see this happening, and you will see a spiral of issues that will come with this fast way of developing, and that will add more frustration to our democracy that is already weak, because we are not working in our foundations, and we are not working, and the foundation is the people, because democracy is supposed to be for the people. That's what it means. The sixth thing is citizen participation, and that's what I was talking about before. How can we have to empower the individuals. We want a more equal society within African countries, but for that we have to understand that African countries have nations within countries. And how do we do this? It's to stop thinking about what I want and the things that I want to see in my country. And by this I mean that we all want the skyscrapers, and we want the beautiful libraries, and we want to see this all of this construction and this is the idea, that what you see is it's development, because you see a pretty building. But then where is the system? The system of the country is what counts to make a good country. Where are the services, social security? These are the issues that we have to think that are postponing a great democracy, and it's just to stop and think, what do we need to do to create a strong foundation that will last for 20, 30 years, and not just 4 years? And our leaders are often very selfish, because they say, oh, I'm just here for the 4 years, to give the illusion that they do not want to stay 10. But what do they do if they are not thinking in 20, 40 years? Because they're not thinking about the youth. And you have to think about the youth. So when you are running for president or for prime minister, you should have someone with you, someone that will take after you, someone that you are instructing already. After the 10 years, I already have someone that can take the torch from me. And we do not see this. That's why after 10 years, you see countries going backwards 20 years, because no leader is actually thinking forward. And the citizen participation is very, very weak, because people in most African countries sometimes don't even have languages that bridge conversations. So my conclusion is that we are it's a setup democracy the way it is.
Yeah.
And we have to think about Afrimocracy, where that means that to me, I created this concept recently, which is just democracy means rule by the people. And I think Afrimocracy means like rule by the African people, that we have to take, we have to understand that this will only work if we acknowledge the issues that we have. It's beautifully, Africa is one, and everything that we should be working in this ideology, creating one identity. But the truth is, the issues are here and they are pretty evident. And if we do not work in acknowledging our citizens and the barriers that they have to the system, which is often lack of communication, because we cannot imagine in Ethiopia, if you all speak, most people will speak the same language, but you have your elders that's they are supposed to vote. It's our responsibility as young people to tell them about the system that is in place and how they can participate as well in democracy. How can you all participate in democracy? Understand how many people are actually going to vote. Imagine in Mali, they would say it's a democracy, everything is all right. It's all right for the French because they just need someone to sign the papers so they can continue digging for their gold and digging for their uranium. But then 80% of the people in Mali do not vote. This is not democracy. This is not what you want. You want at least 80% of the people in a country to have the notion that there's a day that they go out and vote, that they understand what the system is. And that is real democracy. When we all are empowered and we have access to an education that permits that we can all be at the same level somehow. Not all of us will be at the same level, but we'll have a basic understanding of what are my rights, what are my civil rights, where where do I, when I have an issue, where do I go, how do I start,
Awesome.
and that's it. I'm sorry I took more than my 10 minutes.
No, you were good. Awesome. Thank you so much. I think, yes, I think one of the challenges is interpreting it, right? Taking whatever the West has, translating it into whatever it is. I think when it comes to Ethiopia, I think that was the biggest challenge. They imported it and it didn't work. And I think we need to stop doing that, right? We need to develop what works for us based on our history, based on, what our track record is and how we're able to bring our people together, not what works for the West. Because like you said, with language, with tribe, there's just so many. We're a very diverse and rich country, a continent. So it has to be, what works for us, not what worked for somebody else. But I think that also, and I don't think they bring it with the intention or wanting it to work. I think they bring it with the intention of wanting it not to work, right?
Exactly.
And so, and I think that's the key, is like, we have to recognize that, and we have to be able to say, okay, enough. We're going to do what works best for us. And I think someone in the comment mentioned about, when we have leaders who are very passionate, who want to do good, who want to be able to, overcome some of these problems and, bring our people out of poverty, they're shut down, right? They're all of a sudden terrorists or dictators or killers or whatever political term that they can throw at them. And we support that, though, right? People have in history have supported that. We supported the overthrowing of Gaddafi. We supported many things because they brainwash us with these propagandas, and we listen to the media, and all of a sudden the media is telling the truth. And so I think it's creating a society that's more aware, more conscious about what's truly going on. And like someone earlier said, knowing the why, what, and for what reason. And so doing that, I think, would be what we'll have to moving forward. But thank you so much for joining.
I hope this was helpful.
Very helpful.
And not crazy confusing, because I think it's a lot to unpack.
It is.
And it's a conversation that we need to start going and talking about it.
Yeah, and maybe even spend a little more time on each, so we can actually deep dive and
yes, in each country.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for joining us again. I hope you have a
Thank you so
wonderful day.
much.
Awesome.
And good night and good afternoon and good morning for everyone. Bye.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today as we celebrate African History Month. We've had dissected into different topics, media coverage, the impact, our history. So we really appreciate you for joining us and listening in. Dr. Debru's still here, so I'll see if he has a few words to say, and we'll end here in about a minute or so.
Thank you very much, Jerusalem. It was a pleasure
Awesome.
to have kept your company all and to have listened to what you have been saying. Although I have not been behind the screen, I was listening, doing some while having my meal. So it was a great opportunity to be able to. How often do you hold such meetings, panels, by the way?
So this, I think we probably have one more session, I believe, but this will be our last one. Do you have any last remarks that you wanted to share with the audience before we end the session?
Well, again, it's a tremendous pleasure to share our experiences and particularly to the younger generation, how important it is to share what we know. Fundamentally, what distinguishes our continent from the rest of humanity is we know very, very little about each other to begin with. I think we're the most fragmented continent, as you know. Every couple of years, a new country is being born, whereas elsewhere they merge into one. They merge into a bigger thing. So, so there is a lot, and we can overcome our difficulties by having a common platform, and this is one such important area, really. So we need to advertise and get as many people to be able to attend such sessions, particularly the young ones. So that's all I want to say. And again, thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Professor, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And please follow us on Facebook, on YouTube as well. And we'll continue to host similar panel discussions and conversations with the hope that we'll able to bring more Africans together and be able to have these crucial conversations. Thank you for joining us.